So hello fellow Earthlings. This is Earthling 6455463728. And I think I'm going to talk about Joe Rogan's guests, Schwab and can't remember his first name, and Tim Dillon. So the funniest thing about the interview with Schwab, I think he's an MMA guy, and he has his own, a joint podcast with some other people, I think, and he also might be into comedy as well. And in looking at the comments, one of the things that I thought was pretty funny, not laugh out loud in real life funny, but laugh out loud in text message funny, was that people said, or one person said, the reason why I like watching Brendan Schaub, I think it is his name, the reason why I like watching interviews with Brendan Schaub is because it's like watching an episode of Joe Rogan interviewing himself, which I thought was hilariously funny in a laugh out loud kind of text message scenario. And the reason being is that watching Joe Rogan or listening to a Joe Rogan podcast with him and somebody that he knows pretty well, especially in a similar ranking to Brendan Schaub, is that Joe Rogan is essentially talking to himself and the other person is just more or less affirming whatever it is that he's saying, so it's really kind of funny because it's true. And those are some of the more hilarious instances, because I guess Joe Rogan reminded himself in the episode, he's like, you're like, how old are you? And Schwab is like 36, and he's like, yeah, well, I'm 50 something. So he's like 20 years or so, or 18 something odd years on Mr. Schwab. So obviously, and the fact that he was in MMA, and I think he's followed Joe Rogan into either both podcasting and comedy, is he sees Joe Rogan as a mentor, and he should. I mean, if you have a podcast that sees a million odd people, more than that in many instances, listening to each individual podcast, you should probably listen to this guy. He probably knows what he's doing. So, that's kind of hilarious. Now, in this episode and in the other one with Tim Dillon, Joe Rogan repeats the fact that should be clear by now, which is that most of the coronavirus cases didn't come from China. They came from Europe. So that's what he says. Joe Rogan says that according to the articles. And he's like, the fact that they can track these viruses and they can know that it came from Europe and not from China, that's kind of freaky to me. That's weird. And I'm like, well, obviously, Joe Rogan mentioned at some point that he had this TV show, 2014. He said it was part of a bit that he did, wherein that he says he got most of these theories out of his system when he went looking for this show, and he realized that a lot of people just say things that they know are not true, and it's a lot of people who are not married. They are, he called them uneffable white guys, is what he said. And so he got a lot of these conspiracy theories out of his system. Now, he had been touting the fact that, Trump was right to close the borders, and what's his name? Weinstein had said, people are saying we're being xenophobic by doing this kind of stuff. Yeah, and most of the cases came from Europe. And Trump, he did close Europe off after he closed off China, and then he closed off UK, which had a whole bunch of cases anyway. So what was the point? So does Joe come out and say, well, I guess it didn't make it? Now listen, it's one thing for a regular person, as Joe claims to say that Donald Trump is. Apparently, nobody knew that this thing was going to get that bad. This is the president of the United States of America, which is supposed to be one of the most, is the most militarily powerful countries on earth, technologically advanced countries on earth, with respect to spyware and so on, and all these other avenues, the most knowledgeable country on earth. And you have people telling you, listen, this is going to get bad. And, well, Joe Rogan seems to cut him a break, seems to treat him like any guy in the street. Who would know that things were going to get bad, except for somebody who has access to the most knowledgeable people in the world? I mean, that person should know, right? But anyway, Joe Rogan cuts him some slack, and even when it's revealed that it did nothing to cut off China, and he repeats that evidence, he never makes the link to say, well, I guess it didn't really make sense to cut off China and not Europe and England, the UK. So, whatever, Joe. That's fine. I'm still surprised. Well, I guess it isn't really of interest to Joe that he is surprised that viruses mutate so quickly and that they can track the viruses. And he still apparently has not read that article where they said that it is not a product of a biological warfare program. He still has not read that article and dispersed it to his listeners, which I think is really unfortunate. But, you know, what you gonna do? Now, as an aside, one of the things that I heard before the virus went over to the US was that overweight and obesity rates being higher in the US, it might make the impact of the virus be that much greater. As far as I've seen from stats from out of the UK, apparently 64% of people in the UK are either overweight or obese. And in a report on Boris Johnson's condition, they were saying that 70% of the people who were in the ICU were there as a result of, well, not as a result, one of their attributes was that they were either overweight or obese. And at the time, and this has been confirmed by the fact that the 64% of the people in the UK are overweight or obese, they're not that much overly represented in the ICU cases. So I guess the premonition or the idea or the suspicion that being overweight or obese might make people suffer more from coronavirus affliction has not panned out. And obviously Boris Johnson, who was obese at one point and is probably definitely overweight, probably significantly so, has come out of the ICU. Hey, they couldn't save Steve Jobs or Bill Gates' partner at what's the name of that place? At Microsoft. So being a billionaire doesn't help. So yeah, you know, people who are overweight or obese shouldn't really worry too much about being overrepresented in ICU or any of these cases. They seem to be on par with everybody else, unless there's some really other case, illness, asthma or something that somebody has. No, I think Tim Dillon, I think he's funny. He's a funny guy. He's clearly an obese guy, but he's a funny guy. I smiled at some of his jokes that he made with Joe Rogan with respect to, he was saying like, some days I think this is all a hoax, and other days I think I'm going to die. And I thought that was hilarious. That's funny. And Brendan Schaub was like, yeah, you know, I'm going to beat this. And he and Joe Rogan, they were like, yeah, we're good physical specimens. And, you know, I look at myself in the mirror kind of thing. He didn't say that in those words, but he posed. And then him and Brendan Schaub proposed as well. And they're like, yeah, you know, we treat our bodies good and we're going to kick this coronavirus's butt. And it was so funny because then sometime after that, Brendan Schaub is like, yeah, I was so sick. I was sick as whatever, you know. And I'm like, didn't you just say you would kick Corona's butt? Now, apparently he was ill before, maybe in December or so. This is before there were even, you know, any significant reports of the virus. outside of China anyway. And I thought it was funny because one second he's like, yeah, I would beat his butt because I'm a good physical specimen. And the next thing he's saying how sick he was. And I thought that was hilarious. It was actually. Because it is true that even though they keep telling people, yes, if you're younger, you can die from this thing, overwhelmingly, the fact of the matter is that it's really older people that are dying from this. And the people who break the mold, the people who are 40-something, 20-something, they make the papers. And they make the papers and they make the news and they are shown in the media because they are unusual. Nobody is going to come and lead with a story of an 80-year-old that died from this thing, okay? So again, what you see in the media is not reality. What you see in the media is the stuff that is interesting, that is out of bounds, so to speak. But to be honest, I did not look too much into Tim Dillon's episode. I just got a little bit of glimpse into it. I thought it was interesting, and I'm probably going to look some more into it, and maybe I might have another edition completely about that. But like I said, like the person commented, you know, watching Jee Rogan and Brendan Schaub is basically like watching Jee Rogan interview himself. And a lot of times when it's somebody that Jee Rogan knows, he will just talk their ear off, you know. I thought what was hilarious with Brendan Dillon was that now Jee Rogan had already said that Alex Jones had, I guess he still wants to remain to be friends with Alex Jones, and he's saying that Alex Jones said that somebody told him that Joe Rogan's family had been threatened, and he apparently Joe wants to believe that and go with that somebody told him, even though he had Joe Rogan's number, and like Joe Rogan said, he could have called me and found out, but he just said what he said. And he's like, yeah, you know, he said what I believe that somebody told him. Somebody, what's the name? Who's this intermediary that you trust more than the person whose number that you have, that you could just call and ask because you've been on his podcast for however long, and this person is talking about you even though you got banned from YouTube and wherever else? Who is this person, alleged person? Anyway, he's saying that Alex Jones sent him this stuff from because he's convinced. He sent Joe Rogan apparently, and he said, changes his phone number every couple of months, but it doesn't make any difference because Alex Jones sends him all this video and text messages that is supposed to be proof that it is a biological weapon. And I don't know where he was going with that, but he just mentioned it. Anyway, it was kind of funny, I thought. So anyway, guys, sorry I couldn't give you a lot more on either one of these people, but you can wish me luck, you can like or unlike, you can comment, subscribe, and or share. Peace.